Let's continue with the Shuragama Sutra today. And before the actual class, I would like to make just a short and brief note up on the specific day of today, which is the Teacher's Day. In fact, it is the Teacher's Day over here, but the UNESCO back in the 90s, they made October the 5th as the International Teachers' Day. However, over here, usually we have the Teachers' Day on September the 10th. Whatever date it is, it would be a correct date to celebrate anyhow. And I really want to express my gratitude towards all of the teachers and pay my veneration. And I think we all should do that. In fact, not only to the teachers to the people who are working as teachers, as well as people who have ever taught us anything about the worldly knowledge, as well as morality, and any of shared their experience and so on. We, in fact, all owe them our gratitude, because without their sharing of experience and knowledge, we would be rather still quite ignorant and confused. Therefore, we should have this great respect and veneration towards all the teachers and people who've taught you things before. I myself, in fact, when I calculated in the morning, in fact, I've taught for 35 years. Of course, 35 years, it sounds rather quite a long time for an ordinary teacher. But compare Pontsog Rinpoche. In fact, Pontsog Rinpoche started teaching from when he was 13. And between he was 13 years old until he passed away at 74, and he taught for over 50 or 60 years. So the scholars, professors, teachers nowadays, in fact, compared to the years that Pontsog Rinpoche taught others, is probably not as long. On the other hand, I really want to encourage those who are teachers to continuously to cultivate the talents. In fact, you should not only cultivate the talents in terms of their skills. I think more than skills, you should then teach the people, teach your student to be human, to be the human with kindness, with wisdom, with compassion. In fact, I understand that nowadays the career title of teacher is mainly referring to the ones who give teachings on skills. But the teachers, in fact, burdens much more heavy responsibilities on their shoulders, because the teachers have to teach the students how to live their life, how to develop their values, how to then understand and develop their morality and many aspects other than skills and craftsmanship. So for the teachers, you are lamps for many people. You are the refuge place and good spiritual friends of all sentient beings as well. According to the Lankavatara Sutra, where it is stated that the teachers are considered as lamps, as the bestower of knowledge, and so on. There are many different analogies. because you're truly leading the people to kindness, to a better future. Therefore, you can be considered as the engineer of human spirits. So I really hope that you could cultivate the talents that not only have skills and craftsmanship, but also morality and kindness and compassion and all those kind of spiritual qualities as well. So not only to the worldly teachers, I'd like to extend such kind of wish to all of our Dharma masters as well. So in this special day, I would like to make this a special note before the actual class, so that my hope for you is, so that you know that my hope for you is to continuously to work as a teacher, or in this position to continuously to guide others. In fact, during the teaching, when it comes to the actual Shuragama Sutra, I wanted to tell and share lots of the stories. Lots of the stories you are hearing now, it's not some made-up stories. These kind of stories are the stories that is widely quoted and used by the great masters from the past, and they're not based on in fact, the stories are based on evidence. They're not just frivolous stories that's made up by others. Recently, when I listen to the after-class oral presentation, which repeats to our classes, I noticed that the majority of people didn't really listen to the stories properly. For example, the history that I've told about how lots of the pilgrimage sites of Buddhism were buried underneath, and how the history of the Buddhism and how the history of the archaeologists rediscovered those pilgrimage sites and so on. I think they didn't really pay attention to the story. I noticed that the majority of Buddhists, they really only care about the practice aspect of Buddhism, or the Buddhism aspect solely. But when it comes to the different kinds of religions, the different kind of schools, when it comes to the arts and history and all of these kind of scholastic aspect of the teaching, they're not interested anymore. They feel that they are about to attain rainbow body and attain the supreme realization. Therefore, what's the point of studying and understanding the history aspect of Buddhism? What does it have to do with me? I think some of the people would consider that's some people would consider that's where they are at this point in terms of their realization. They feel that they're about to gain enlightenment within 6 or 12 months. So what's the point of understanding technology, of science, of development of civilization and so on? What's the point of all that? I think lots of people really feel that way. But in fact, to attain rainbow body, to attain the supreme enlightenment is not that easy. And practice cannot, and you cannot just envision yourself attaining such kind of enlightenment with a short period of practice. So I really looked into lots of the resources to help you to then build up your knowledge base, so that later on you can use such knowledge to help others. Because in fact, if it is not helpful to you, I wouldn't spend so much time of looking for these kind of stories. It really takes me a lot of time to research and look for lots of the stories, or even some of the facts and histories. For example, yesterday I told you the story of Alexander Cunningham's story, the archaeologist's story. I spent lots of time when I was in India back in the 90s, when I was doing the research years before and last winter. In fact, during the 3 phases, I spent lots of time to look for the history of rediscovering the archaeological sites. You can take it as only a story. However, such kind of key factor is truly important to Buddhism history. Therefore, as practitioners, you really should listen to the stories that I tell very carefully, because I am trying to make a point. And in fact, behind each of the stories and each of the classes, I spent tremendous amount of time to prepare for the classes. If you're listening to one class, if your mind is rather disturbed and distracted halfway through the class, and then you probably miss one key point and completely forgot about how the different stories connect to each other. For example, when I'm telling the story of a history, you should contemplate about why I am telling such a story, because I am trying to make a point. And why don't you try to listen and contemplate why I'm trying to make such a point? I am not nagging you, and my words are not really repetitive for no reason. From time to time, I try to repeat for different reasons. On top of that, I think lots of people do not understand how to listen to the Dharma. In the text, the words of my perfect teacher, at the very beginning, it talks about the proper ways of listening to the Dharma. I think for those of you who don't know how to listen to the Dharma, you should then go back and read it. The merit that we receive from listening to the class is tremendous. Don't even mention about the merit that we accumulate through listening and contemplating and practice the Dharma together. Let's just think about chanting the King of Aspiration of Samattabhadra at the end. Just contemplate upon how many people are doing this practice together with you at the same time. Such kind of merit is immeasurable. In Chinese, Tibetan language, as well as other kinds of languages, are all available. Therefore, the chanting of the before class recitation, as well as the after class chanting, you should try your best to participate in them, because all the languages are available. And it doesn't take that much time, really. It takes about half an hour in the beginning and maybe around 15 minutes at the end. It doesn't really take that much time when you consider how much time you spend in distraction. If you can focus your mind and begin the class with a kind aspiration and maintain such kind of aspiration and intention all along throughout the whole class, and then at the end dedicate the merit, then such kind of merit is inexhaustible. Last class we talked about how Buddhism got lost in the history of India. The river of history is quite turbulent, and such kind of events that happens to the Dharma and to the history of Dharma. Therefore, we should contemplate upon such kind of changes and impermanence. Also, let's just take a quick review of last class. Last class we talked about the 6 kinds of accomplishment. The accomplishment of faith, of listening, of time, of the master, of the place, of the assembly. So those are the 6 accomplishments. Last time we also talked about the Jetavana Vihara. In fact, we talked about it many times throughout their teachings. So we are at a place where we're going to talk about the sixth accomplishment of the assembly. Over here, there are 1,250 bhikshus. There are the Shravakas and the Shravakas who've already uphold the perfect precepts. Those are the great bhikshus that all gathered over there. In fact, when we look at the number 1,250, that sounds very familiar, isn't it? In fact, this is the numbers of students that followed the Buddha very constantly and most of the time. For example, this number appeared in the Vajrachatika or the Diamond Sutra, as well as Amitabha Sutra. According to the historical record, Vasubandhu also had around over 1,000 of disciples following him at that time. And Phuntsog Rinpoche, at the end of his life, he had around 5,000 disciples following him. Anyhow, over here it says that 1,250 bhikshus. And who are these bhikshus? Who are these disciples then? According to some of the history records, it is stated that there are the three great Kasyapas. Kasyapa, in fact, was born in a Brahmin family, was from a heretics tradition. And then the three Kasyapa brothers has about 1,000 disciples following him, and then Moddagalayana as well as Shariputra, they both had about 100 disciples each, and therefore that's 100, and that's 1,200. And the Upanishad, who had about 50 and 50 disciples following them. So the 1,000 who followed the three Kasyapas, and 200 following Shariputra, as well as Moddagalayana, and the 50 disciples of Upanishad, and the 5 original disciples who follow the Buddha. Therefore, in total, there are 1,255 people following them. But over here, it states in the 1,250 bhikshus, as well as the 5. In fact, it should be 1,255. So, do you know about the story of the three Kasyapa brothers? In fact, when the Buddha first renounced from his palace life, and then King Bimbisara told the king, told Shakyamuni at that time, who was not enlightened, said that once you get enlightened, then I will fulfill all your wishes. If you gain the realization of Anattara Samya Sambodhi, I genuinely invite you to come to my country and benefit my people over here in my kingdom. And after Shakyamuni Buddha attained enlightenment, then King Bimbisara came to him and invited him to his country. At that time, the Kasyapa family has 3 sons. The 3 sons, out of which the eldest son was the teacher of the King Bimbisara, although he was from a heretic's palace. So after the king invited Shakyamuni Buddha to his kingdom, Kashyapa then listened to the discussion and the dialogues given by the Buddha and Moggallana. And at that time, he had this aspiration of relying on the Buddha as his teacher. However, he felt that he can't do that because he felt that if he were to rely upon the Buddha, then all of his disciples would all run away from him and not rely on him anymore. Therefore, he, instead of relying upon the Buddha as his teacher, he asked the Buddha to leave the country. And then the Buddha said, okay, so I can leave if you don't have great anger towards me, then can I just ask you to let me stay with you for one night? And Kashyapa at that time said, I in fact have no aggression towards you. However, there's a poisonous Naga who stays over here. That Naga might be really angry at you though. But the Buddha said, that's okay, because I have already eradicated all the 3 poisons within me. Therefore, I would not be afraid of the poisonous Naga anymore. And at night, the Naga appeared, and the Buddha subjugated the Naga with the 18 kinds of miraculous manifestation. Then, when the Buddha was manifesting with his 18 kinds of miraculous actions, upon seeing such kind of miraculous actions, Kashyapa as well as his brothers and the 500 disciples all then attained a certain realization and took refuge in the Buddha. And then after that, 500 more disciples witnessed this and took refuge to the Buddha and attained a certain level of realizations as well. So that's the story behind the 3 Kashyapa brothers of taking refuge in the Buddha. And then there's also a story of Shariputra. Shariputra is quite well known Shariputra was quite well known, and Shariputra and Moggallana were best friends, and they would share all kinds of spiritual experiences and talk about this kind of spiritual path with one another, with each other. And when Shariputra saw Assaji, who was a bhikshu following the Buddha at that time, and Shariputra, upon seeing this really inspiring deportment of Assaji, and asked him, "Who is your teacher?" And Bhikshu Assaji said that my teacher is Buddha Shakyamuni. And the teachings that my teacher gave me was that all dharmas arising from causes and conditions will be brought to cessation due to certain causes and conditions. All dharmas arise and cease due to causes and conditions. This is the teaching of the Tathagata, the great Shramana. So at that time, upon hearing the teaching, upon hearing these 4 stanzas, Shariputra had a great devotion and a great faith. And Shariputra felt that he had to share this with his best friend, Moggallana. And then after talking to Moggallana, they both went to the Buddha and took refuge to the Buddha along with the 200 disciples that they had at that time. And after receiving the teachings from the Buddha, they all attained arhathood. According to the Vinaya Sutra, where the translation is a bit different than the previous one that is stated in the sutra taught by the Buddha in the beginning. It is translated as all Buddhas originate from a cause. The Tathagata has taught this cause, that which brings the cause to cessation. This too has been taught by the great Shramana. I think we we, in fact, quote this very often, very frequently. In Buddhism, we often recite and quote from some of the from the sutras, and the mantra of causality, in fact, is the Sanskrit version of this 4-verse stanza. Whenever we do any kind of consecration ceremonies, we would recite this in the Sanskrit mantra and remind one another of the beginning of the causes. The teachings of the Buddha is rather different. And what's so different about the Buddha's teaching? In fact, the difference is that it talks about the origination, it talks about the causality. In fact, everything happens. All the dharmas originate from the cause. And that is from the aspect of relative truth, and from the ultimate truth, we talk about all causality is empty. So out of all the teachers, all the great teachers in this world, the great Shramana, that is the Buddha Shakyamuni, is the greatest teacher of all. So I've briefly explained to you of the stories of the assembly. So there were 1,250. On top of that, there are the 5 original disciples of the Buddha as well. So these group of people are often following. They used to were often following the Buddha at that time. And from such kind of descriptions, you will be able to know that at that time, those were the group of people who followed the Buddha often. To continue, let's then study the following part. This is more like the scene setting aspect. Then, with all the arhats and bodhisattvas present, what are their merits then? Compared to the other sutras, the Shrangama Sutra is translated really well. In Chinese translation, the majority of the stanzas are translated in 4 characters of Chinese, 4 Chinese characters. And for people who don't really have a good foundation in the Chinese language, especially in the ancient Chinese language, they tend to have a hard time to understand this. But the translation in Tibetan language is rather much more easier to understand. Okay, so over here it says that the great arhats who had crossed the stream of transmigration, they had already surpassed the defilements. They eradicated all the defilements. Such kind of great arhats, according to the sutras, where it says that the great arhats, sometimes it is they can be considered as the great saints, and sometimes the Buddha is also called the great arhats, because what a great arhat means is that the one who had completely destroyed all the defilements and afflictions. Next one, it says that they upheld his teaching firmly. could leap over all realms of existence and had achieved respect and had achieved the respect inspiring deportment which was held in great esteem throughout the country. In the Chinese translation, it says that the son of Buddha. So what does it mean by the son of the Buddha? It means that as the son, as the heir of the Buddha, then they upheld the teachings of the Buddha and try to continuously to pass down the teaching of the Buddha. And then they can be called the heir of the Buddha. The bodhisattvas can be called the heir of the bodhisattva because the bodhisattvas are the Buddha's mind heir in terms of body, mind, speech. And the arhats can be considered as the speech heir because they as they hear the teachings of the Buddha and attain arhathood. So what do they uphold then? In fact, they uphold the teachings. They constantly abide and stay in the state of the Dharma and uphold the correct Dharma. So the heir of the Buddha upheld his teaching firmly. So all the bodhisattvas and the heir of the Buddha, they are going to uphold the Tathagata's teaching, and on top of that, they would continuously to pass down the teachings and propagate the teachings. In China mainland, usually the abbots of each temples are called the upholders of the Dharma or upholders. Why are they called upholders? In fact, in the Chinese language, it has two aspects. One is uphold, and the other one is to abide in. On top of that, they will then continuously to propagate, to give teachings of the Dharma. According to the precious teaching of the Chan monastery, it says that as an upholder, there are three things, or as an abbot, there are three things that you should not do. There are the three don'ts for an abbot. Don't be discouraged when things are rather quite chaotic, because if you are afraid of all the chores and of all the little things that could bother you, then you shouldn't be an abbot. You shouldn't be an upholder of the Dharma, because there will obviously be people coming to you with their problems. And the other one is, the second don't is that when things are complicated, do not make a fuss about nothing. Do not make a fuss about anything. In fact, there are people nowadays, they make a fuss about nothing all the time. And such kind of people cannot be and should not be an abbot or upholder. Some of the Dharma teachers, they tend to be very ups and downs and have lots of such kind of emotional ups and downs. Usually, when I hear people give really good oral presentation, I would go back and have a good sleep. But when people do not do a good oral presentation after the class, I would feel that why couldn't they give a good oral presentation? And I would not be able to have a good sleep. Sometimes when I hear people do not understand what I've told, I feel rather quite upset about it. For example, yesterday I only heard one of the lay practitioners who actually told the stories quite well. And then the third one is don't argue when in trouble. And if you can do these, if you can then avoid all these three above, then an abbot would be able to never be affected by external factors. When we think about taking up the responsibilities of taking up the responsibilities of propagating and abiding in the Tathagata's career, I think we should keep in mind that we should not avoid little things, and we should not make a fuss of nothing. We should try to understand where the balance is. In terms of managing the centers, managing any kind of Dharma practicing Sangha, we should really understand how to be appropriate in handling everything. There are people who would expel the students and disciples rather quite frivolously and out of not much of a serious reason. However, you should also not to take the other extreme, that let other people do whatever they want. The word abbot, it has the meaning of upholder of the Dharma, the one who is abiding the Dharma. I think the ones who are managing a Sangha, managing a center, they can also be called an abbot, because that's what they're doing. They're propagating the Dharma. They are then abiding the Dharma as well as upholding the Dharma. People have very different capacities and very different wisdom. The ones with wisdom, they can fulfill and they can then handle all kinds of situations very appropriately. And the ones without wisdom, they will make a chaos out of nothing. And they would feel rather quite upset afterwards. So people's capacities are quite different. In terms of propagating the Dharma, when it comes to managing the team, managing the Sangha, managing the center, I really hope that you could contemplate, you can then study the management skills. Do not think of yourself as someone who is so great and you don't have to learn from anyone else at all. I think you should try to be rather humble and learn from everyone. If you were to be very humble and learn from everyone's experience, then in such a way, you will be able to manage the team. You'll be able to be more mature in terms of your own management skills. According to Mipa Rinpoche, he said that lots of the things that we've done when we were young, in fact, are quite naive and laughable even once we get mature. So, in order to avoid feeling ashamed of ourselves afterwards, why don't we take the opportunity and to be humble and learn from everyone to gain experiences? So, that's the term of abbot or upholder. The next one, then it says that you could leap over all realms of existence. In some of the commentaries, it says that to leap over all realms of existence talks about arhathood. And some said that this part, in fact, talks about bodhisattvas. In terms of existence, there are the 12 existence out of the as the categories of the 3 existence. In terms of the realm of form, the realm of formlessness, realm of desire. The arhats and bodhisattvas, they are completely leapt over all realms of existence, because without attaining such kind of state, they won't be able to attain arhathood or becoming a bodhisattva of bhumis. The next one is as which was held in great esteem throughout the country. In order to benefit sentient beings, they would achieve all kinds of respect-inspiring deportments to influence others. For example, they would uphold the deportment of being peaceful, being humble, being respectful, and being very inspiring to others in order to eradicate other people's afflictions. Just as it is said in the Vimalakirti Sutra, where it says that without getting out of the samadhi or meditative absorption, one would manifest in different deportments, such as walking, lying down, and sitting, and so on. The other explanation is that such kind of deportments, including the body, mind, speech deportments, in order to benefit others. So this is about the deportment aspect. Then the next part is the wisdom aspect. They followed the Buddha to turn the wheel of the Dharma and were qualified to hand down his Dharma. So, arhats or bodhisattvas, they would follow the Tathagata and then turn the Dharma wheel. And they were qualified to hand down his Dharma. Because the means of turning the wheel of Dharma is to spread the wisdom to all generations so that the wisdom could be passed down from generations to generations. In Tibetan language, the addition, in fact, it is translated as that to propagate the wisdom, because when we are propagating the wisdom, it could eradicate our inappropriate actions. According to the treatise on the provisions for enlightenment by Arya-Nagarjuna, it says that emulating the Buddha to turn the supreme Dharma wheel will eradicate all evil thorns, which is the treasury of merit of Bodhisattva. What it means is that after you turn the wheel of the Dharma, in fact, it will eradicate all the evil thorns. They will eradicate all the non-correct Dharma. What is evil thorns? It's that something that is something inappropriate in terms of actions, but it's under the cover of being an appropriate behavior or conduct. So, to eradicate all the evil thorns is the treasury of merit of Bodhisattva. To us, in fact, we should spend the time to study and read more into the commentaries of the previous masters. Also, I would like to make this avocation that when we're studying the Shrangama Sutra, I really encourage you to read more into the commentaries of the previous masters. Nowadays, it's rather quite easy to gain access to different resources. You can then look up on it online. There are open source material, and you can print it out. You can then go to bookstores and get books online and so on. In fact, lots of the resources, lots of the commentaries are available. Of course, there are the ones which are lost throughout the history. For example, do you remember the story that we told that Master Wei Chue, who composed this commentary of the 3 volumes of Shrangama Sutra because of the blessings of Manjushri, that Manjushri came into his mouth and dissolved into him, and then started composing the commentary. And then after he finished composing the commentary, then Manjushri left in his dream. But when I went back last night, I really wanted to read this commentary, so I spent a lot of time looking up for it. But in fact, that commentary had lost in the history. It is no longer to be found. It is such a shame and such a pity for our generation that we will no longer be able to read it. Also, Master Xu Yun's commentary, which was one of the most important work of his life, was also lost because of the turbulent time he lived in. So, when we look into this kind of commentaries no longer being available, it is really such a pity. Back in the Tang Dynasty, Master Wei Chue, in fact, wrote this commentary. Do you know how many commentaries there are in total in history? There are about over 127 volumes of commentaries based on all the previous great masters. And there was a scholar who listed this 127 commentaries in a chronological format, where he listed Master Wei Chue as the first one because he composed that one back in Tang Dynasty, and then second one is Zixuan, and so on. For us, the following disciples, in fact, I think that we should read more into the commentary. I took a short video of all the commentaries that I have on my bookshelf on my table, and I'll give you a glimpse of that.
Mm-hmm. 如果有时间，最好多看一下蓝眼睛的各种不同的讲集。你像在这里，好多蓝眼睛的书啊，本来想好好的看一下，但是时间还是有限的。这个是寒山大师的，还有欧益大师的，玄幻上人的，然后元益大师的，还有什么蓝怀进的啊，就好多那个大德们的这些注释，如果有时间都看一下好不好？不要只读一个蓝眼睛，多看一下其他的本本，好不好 ？OK， 拜拜。
It was a selfie. I think nowadays people really like this kind of short clips, isn't it? Okay, so to continue, when we talk about to pass down the wisdom, I really hope that you could spend the time and effort to study, because lots of the times I think it's quite difficult for us to understand the Shurangama Sutra based on our soul, based on our abilities and capacities solely. Therefore, we need the commentaries from the previous masters. Even if you can't and don't have time to read into the commentaries of others, at least you should read into the transcripts of each classes. So I really wanted to make such a note based on that. Anyhow, we've already talked about the Vinaya aspect, which is the discipline aspect, and then the wisdom aspect, and this part we're going to talk. The previous we talked about departments, and now we're going to talk about the self-discipline. Previously we talked about departments, the wisdom as well. Over here, the third aspect is self-discipline. Being self-disciplined, they set a good example in the three worlds in which they appeared in countless transformation bodies to deliver living beings to save future generations from defilements. According to the praise to the actions of the Buddha, where it said that In the wilderness of birth and death, the Vinaya is the perfect guiding master. So, good example they follow the Buddha to turn the being self-disciplined. They set a good example. Good example is in fact quite important, which remind me a story of spread by setting good example. I will retell this story again. Spread by setting a good example. It means that to propagate the good Dharma, to become a good teacher to the three worlds. And this is commonly used in the Han Buddhism. But there was a person who was then winning bread in the instead of spreading by good example, it is winning bread by setting a good example. Especially in the time that employment is such a difficult time, and cooking, you have to cook for yourself. But of course, in this time, I think to have bread on your table is not that difficult anymore. In fact, on the Tibetan plateau is no longer like it was before. It is not that people would starve to death anymore, unlike there are people who would go out to then ask for charity, saying that we have no money to eat. It's not like that at all. Compared to Cambodia and compared to compared to lots of the African countries, I think Tibetan plateau is quite plenty in terms of food, at least. There was a story recorded in the memoir of Dream City that is written by Master Dan Xu, and it recorded the story of inside this temple called the Jinshan Temple, where there was a monk whose job was to lit lamps. Back in that time, on June the 6th, it is said that those are the days to sun-dry those books and sun-dry lots of the precious objects, artifacts that is usually stored in the temples, so that they're not molten and so on. And then, because this monk who is in charge of lighting lamps and candles is rather quite dull in capacity, therefore, and he's quite gullible, and the other monks was making fun of him and told him, saying that well, on this day, you should also lay out all your candles so that your candles won't get molten either. Therefore, he took out all of his candles and spread it over the yard, and he put all of those candles underneath the sun for the entire day. In the evening, when it cooled down, all the candles, all the wax were all melted, and only the wicks were all standing up, and all of the wax were flooding all over the floor. And in the evening, when they were about to lit candles, the other monks, the monk who was in charge of the abbot of the monastery, said that the abbot of the monastery, in fact, was quite disappointed and surprised and disappointed in him, and then found an excuse to expel him, saying that, well, you are such a smart monk. You shouldn't stay in our small temple because you're over talented, you're over qualified to be a monk who's only in charge of lighting the candles. And in fact, it was not the abbot who said so, it was the chanter. So upon hearing the chanter said that, this monk who was lighting the candles thought, this chanter's so good to me. And whenever I would go out, I would always remember him. And the chanter told him, saying that, why don't you go out and study in a different monastery where you can become a great master later on, to then set good examples and liberate the three worlds? And at that time, this monk who was lighting the candles thought it was such a great idea, and instead of thinking setting a good example, he thought, instead of hearing that set a good example and spread the Dharma by setting good example, he heard that winning bread by setting good example in the three worlds. And he thought, wow, how wonderful is that? I'll be able to win bread wherever I am in the three worlds. So that's how this monk got expelled and sent away to a different monastery. So this monk then went to Master Di Xian and studied and told him that I am in fact of great talent, told by the chanter from my previous temple, and he said that I will be able to win bread anywhere in the three worlds and spread the good teaching of the Dharma to benefit them. Master Di Xian, after hearing this, understood immediately of his capacity, and he didn't expel him. Instead, the master asked him to work in the kitchen. He's in fact quite diligent. He's very hardworking. He cooked, he washed dishes, he cleaned the temple, and all of these. Upon witnessing his diligence, Master Di Xian then asked this monk to recite the stanzas of the Lotus Sutra as well as the Shurangama Sutra. At the beginning, it took him a long time to remember even one stanza, but slowly and slowly, with his perseverance as well as his diligence, he then got much better in the later years. And later on, Master Di Xian asked him to memorize Master Oyi's commentary on the Shurangama Sutra. This is how thick this is. Master Oyi's commentary is very difficult to read in terms of the wording and so on, but the content is quite profound. So this monk was asked to memorize the entire commentary that is as thick, that is this book. So he memorized this commentary as well as a commentary on the Lotus Sutra of Master Oyi. And he could memorize everything at that time. He was really excellent. And then later on, he became an associate professor, almost an associate master. So whenever the master is not there, he would be the one who gives the teaching. He's no longer dull in capacity anymore. He's almost like the. After recitation of the teaching of the Shurangama Sutra and the Lotus Sutra, it almost seems that he had opened his being able to recite and teach and become much more eloquent, just as he had completely opened his samadhi of eloquence. In fact, he at that time not only gave teachings whenever it is his turn to teach, he also continued with his previous work in the temple, such as cooking and washing in the kitchen and so on. He would wear an apron whenever he was in the kitchen, and people would ask him and signaling him that this is his turn to give teaching of the Dharma. He would then take off his apron and put on his robe and went onto the throne and give teaching. And that's how he was later on in his age. The chanter, do you still remember the chanter? In fact, at that time, the chanter told him at the time of expelling him, saying that whenever you become a good master, then I'll become your chanter for you. I'll then lead the chanting of the whole assembly to welcome you to give the teaching. And later on, when this monk became really good at giving teachings, the chanter got great faith in him and agreed, and then came to study with him and really became his chanter later on. So he is renowned as the monk who sun-dried the candle. In fact, it was not a veneration for his name. It was rather a name to laugh at his dull faculty. But later on, based on chanting and reciting the sutra and commentaries, he became very sharp and really eloquent in his life. Around the time he was over 50 years of age, when he was giving teachings with Master Disian at Nanking, at city of Nanking, he passed away, and the way he passed away was quite miraculous as well. He knew the time that he was going to die, and he was quite at ease to face his death. So, the way that the previous masters would persevere, would then be very diligent, is rather quite different than how we are nowadays. Anyhow, spread the Dharma by setting example, or winning bread by setting good example. However it is, I think this kind of a story is quite important to remember. The previous ones talks about the Vinaya as well, the discipline as well as wisdom or spreading the Dharma. Then it says that in which they appear in countless transformation bodies in to deliver living beings and to save future generation from defilements. So they would appear in different kind of formations and different kind of bodies to appear in countless transformation. This part talks about to teach in the 10 directions, to be completely pervasive in the 10 directions. The previous one talks about pervasive in this land and this time, and this part talks about pervasive in the 10 directions. And then it says to save the future generation from defilement. It talks about pervasive in all the future times. So that's the future aspect of benefiting sentient beings. So, out of all these kind of characteristics, who are these arhats then? I'm going to tell you the 2 stories of the great arhats who are over here, who are present here. One is Shariputra, and second one is Mahamodgalyayana. Let's talk about Shariputra. As we know that Shariputra is known as the foremost of the wisdom. He is always on the right side of the Buddha. And in the Agama Sutra, it says, in the Ikoti Agama Sutra, it described Shariputra as that the one with immeasurable wisdom and that cuts through all uncertainties is Bhikshu Shariputra. Why is he named as Shariputra? In fact, his mother is. In fact, this name comes from his mother. What does it mean, Shariputra? In fact, Shariputra, Shari means a pelican. It's a bird, because his mother has these eyes that looks almost like a bird's eye. They have this beautiful. She had this beautiful eyes that is quite bright. And the pupil and the whites of the eyes are quite distinctive, and because of such kind of characteristics, she is then named as having the name of the bird or pelican, and then her son's name is Shariputra, which means the son of the son of Shari. The next great arhat is Mahamodgalyayana, who is known as the foremost in the numinous penetration. According to the Ikuttara Agama, it says that the one who is excellent in the ability to perform miracles like flying easily to anywhere in the 10 directions is Bhikshu Modgalyayana. What's the story of Modgalyayana then? In fact, Modgalyayana came from the lineage, or his family is of the family of the sages, and they were all vegetarians. They picked beans, and his first name was Kalita, and his last name, his family name, is Modgalyayana. His parents could not conceive till an old age to have a child. Therefore, they supplicated to a tree, that is the tree Kalita, and Modgalyayana in fact was born from the tree Kalita. Therefore, his name is Modgalyayana, Kalita Modgalyayana. In Tibetan language, Modgalyayana means the son of Modgalya. In some books, it says that his mother is Modgalya, and his name means the son of Modgalya. So I'm not quite sure if the name. In fact, Kalita is a tree, and and maybe because he was born from that tree, therefore he was then named as Modgalyayana, and it means that Modgalya or Modgar it means certain things. It could be a tree's name, or it could be his mother's name. There are different explanations of his name according to different translations and editions. These two are the foremost in the wisdom and foremost in the numinous powers out of all the disciples of Shakyamuni Buddha. And later on we will talk about the other disciples and great arhats, great bodhisattvas in next class.